gurus and etc. But there was a friend of his named Green, Gene, or Joe or something like that. Green was his name. So he had visited the temple in 26 Second Avenue, and he suggested that Bruce should go and visit the temple. And it just so happened that Bruce's studies, he was doing his postgraduate work at New York University, NYU. And his thesis was on Bhagavad Gita. So he suggested if you go there to that 26 Second Avenue, you'll learn something on the Gita. And besides that, Allen Ginsberg, who was a famous poet, he saw him there too. His friend saw him there. And he knew that Bruce was very much attracted by Allen Ginsberg's poetry. So it took him a while, but eventually he walked from his apartment, which was in Manhattan, because he was going to college, and he walked to the temple. And it describes that when he walked to the temple, he felt like his whole life was changing. There was something that was going to happen, and his life was about to change. So when he got to the temple, there was some young people about the same age as him in the temple. He didn't know them, but later on he learned who they were. It was Mukunda and Kirtanananda and some of the other early devotees. And Srila Prabhupada was there. And Srila Prabhupada gave a class, and there was kirtan. So that was his first experience with 26 Second Avenue. But right away, he became attracted by that. And then he became a regular visitor to the temple. Now, he had, besides doing his postgraduate studies, he also had a job. And he used to work for an NGO that was, social work, social welfare work. So at the end of every class, they would pass a basket around, and people would, the persons there would give a little donation, some coins, once in a while $1, right? But because Bruce had a job, he put in $100 bill. And the interesting thing is that to him is that usually if in some kind of function, if there's a collection, they'll count it in the back. But Srila Prabhupada would just count it in front of everybody right after the collection, And he noticed this $100 bill, right? And he looked right at Bruce, and he gave him a nod of approval, So Bruce could understand this was like his first service that he did for Srila Prabhupada. And so then he was coming regularly every day to the 26 Second Avenue, listening, participating in the kirtans. And he decided that he wanted to become more serious. He became less interested in his postgraduate studies. He was spending a lot of time in the temple. And And so he thought he would quit his job and dedicate full time. So he went to Srila Prabhupada. And 26 Second Avenue was a little storefront, right? Behind the storefront there was some apartments, and Prabhupada lived in one of the apartments. So Prabhupada paid $75 a month for the storefront, and the rent was $50 a month for the apartment where he lived, right? So Brahmananda went to him, still Bruce at that time, and said, you know, Swamiji, I'm thinking that, you know, I want to dedicate full time to this and give up my job. So at that time, the full-time devotees that were there, and you know, this was like in August, and Srila Prabhupada formed ISKCON in July 1966, right? The movement officially is just like 2 months old, and there's just a few devotees initiated. So he said he wanted to give up his job and dedicate full time. Now none of the other full-time devotees even had a job, right? So Srila Prabhupada preached to him that, you know, real renunciation is to use everything in the service of Krishna, right? And whatever it is, we may think that it's material, but if it's used in the service of Krishna, it has its spiritual identity. So in this way, he preached to Bruce not to give up his job, but to keep his job and use the whatever he earned in the service of Krishna. In the service of Krishna, Bruce thought, well, how do I do that? How do I use whatever I earn in the service of Krishna? Right? So Prabhupada said, you don't worry about that. You just give it to me, and I'll use it in the service of Krishna. So he did that. He did that. And